shop just outside Kennesaw here in North Georgia. Well, today's project is going to be a repair to a broken drawer. Now before we get started, drawer repairs can be done a million ways. Drawer joints can be done a million ways. And artisan woodworkers and good woodworkers and really even just hobbyist woodworkers love to show off their skills in drawer joinery. I'm not that guy. We're going to use simple joinery to fix this drawer so it matches the other one in the set. If you're looking for someone who's going to use walnut splines in a miter joint or hand cut tiny little dovetails or do some kind of Japanese interlocking wood joint, this isn't the video for you. So type in the search engine right up there, whatever you want, and you'll find it. I say that unapologetically because this drawer construction is simple, and that's what we're going to use to put it back together. A couple of days ago, my wife came home and asked me if I wouldn't mind gluing a drawer back on a drawer for someone, and of course, I said sure. This is what I got. These are pieces of 1/4 inch plywood that have been nailed in with box nails. They're not even wide enough to make a drawer out of. So basically all we have is this oak drawer front, and I'll bring you in just a minute, but the existing or the pre-existing drawer is all broken off inside the joinery. What I do have, however, is what I am told is an identical drawer from the same piece of furniture. I don't know if that's the truth. It's not up to me to decide. I'm just going to make a drawer identical to this one in size with this as the front. So let me bring you in and I'll show you what we're doing. Here's the back of the intact drawer, and you can see that's just a simple rabbet joint. It's basically a groove cut out the back of here, and then the back piece fits into that. There's just a little tiny sliver of wood remaining here. That's not any good. And we'll duplicate that joint, but we'll do it a little nicer. And then in the front, turn this around, you can see a little bit better. In the front is what's called a locking rabbet joint, or what's left of one. And this is basically where you run a groove in the side of the drawer, and then you cut a groove in the front, and this little tail of wood fits in here, so when the force of the drawer going this way, it's not only pulling against the glue joint, which is here and here, it's also pulling against this bit of wood, which resists that force coming apart. Now if you look at the piece of wood that we have, the front that we have, you can see that the bottom broke clean off in the face. We've got to get that dug out, and then the original joint held. It was the wood that failed. The joint is still glued in there, and to be honest with you, we're going to have to get this out, and I'm going to do it on the table saw. So we're just going to have a dado joint here, that L, like just in the back, and then that's how we're going to construct the front of the drawer. It's a rather primitive joint. It's just a step up from a butt joint, but that's really all we have left. It would be a dream for me to think that I'm going to be able to preserve that little sliver of wood, and that's going to have any real effect on the strength of the joint. I don't think it's going to. So that's the plan. So the first thing we've got to do is get this piece cleaned out, and that's a job for the table saw. And you're looking at the groove that is cut in the drawer front for the drawer bottom. Normally that's a 1/4 inch deep. I have a gauge here, it's in 30 seconds, so 30 seconds, but I'll set that in there. And you can see it's just a little bit more than a 1/4 of an inch deep. I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch and see what's under there. Now let's come over to the table saw, and it's going to be the blade height that's going to determine the depth of that cut. And this is a little gauge for table saws, and the first graduation there is a 1/4 of an inch. So when you bring a blade up, I'm going to turn you sideways, I'm sorry. There you go, that's how we set the height. And then we've moved the fence in. Now hopefully you can see this. And we've got the outside or the inside of the blade edge right here lined up with the inside of that line. So we're ready to run our first cut to try to rip out what's left of the old drawer bottom. Now anytime in this project that I'm cutting grooves, I'm just going to use multiple cuts with this 1/8 inch blade. There are what's called dado sets. I have one. They allow you to make the blade assembly wider and wider. I cannot stand setting machinery up for simple jobs. In my opinion, I would spend more time installing the dado set and testing it and removing it than I would if I just made multiple cuts. So those of you that are familiar with dado sets, yeah, I have one. I do use them if I'm doing multiples operations, but in general for a repair like this, I'm just going to use multiple cuts on the 1/8 inch blade to save the setup time. All right, let's fire this thing up and see what happens. We're in real good shape back here, and we're working to get this off. So what I'm going to do is do some multiple cuts here, and I'm going to get the rest of this out of here, so I'll bring you right back. And here's how we clean this out. And this turns out this isn't perfectly straight. So what I've elected to do is leave a little bit of material in here, and I'm going to clean this out with a chisel. And here's what we were able to chisel out of that broken drawer bottom. The tool of the day was a 1/4 inch chisel. Here's the groove all cleaned out. It's a 1/4 inch wide. It's a little deeper than a 1/4 of an inch, but that's really not critical. Now the next measurement we have to take is the width of the drawer sides, and those tend to be a 1/2 inch. Now for those of you doing repairs, you know that hardwoods and pine and most stock lumber comes in 3/4 inch width. The only thing that comes in 1/2 inch width normally, or 1/2 inch thickness normally, is plywood. So when you plan a drawer repair, you've got to have in mind how you're going to narrow the width of the sides and the backs. And I'll show you how we're going to do that later. But anyways, we're a 1/2 inch here. So if we come back down to the existing side that we have, you see we're a 1/2 inch there. So what I'm going to do is remove all of this broken side right up to that mark, and that'll give us a 1/2 inch rabbet that we can put our side into. And the side will look just like this one, but we're not going to have the locking rabbet, because that's all that's left of that locking rabbet. On this side, you can see this little piece right here, and down on this side it's even narrower. It's just not worth the effort of saving that, of grooving this out and hoping we don't snap that off while we're chiseling it out. It's just not going to work. For this repair, it's going to be fine, and that's how we're going to do it, because I'm the one who's doing it. So let's get this cut to 1/2 inch depth. Okay, the first thing we need to do is set the blade height. The easiest way to do that in this instance is just to put the piece there and raise the blade. I'm having a tough time seeing this with the camera in the way, but until we make contact there. I'm going to eyeball this measurement for now. It looks like it's right where it needs to be. Now finally, if you push this against the fence, you run the risk of having some kickback. So what I'm going to do is, on the miter gauge, hold it tight with my fingers. I'm going to move the fence out of the way. So that's how we do that. Well, that was easy. You can see this broken piece of the old drawer just popped right off, so our cut must have been very, very accurate. All right, let me repeat this on the other side, and I'll bring you back. And here's the 1/4 inch plywood I'm going to use for the bottom, and that fits in there nice. And then if we take our newly cut drawer, put it up against the 1/2 inch side, you'll see that it fits just as it should. And measuring off the old drawer, I cross-cut off of a piece of 1x6 common pine. Total cost for 8-foot length was $8 1/4, I think, down at Home Depot. But I rough cut these 3 pieces that we'll need. I cut them a little bit long, and we'll play around with them at the very end. And now we're going to cut them to width of the drawer. And the best way to do that is just put one side of the drawer up against the blade of the saw, one side of the drawer up against the fence, lock the fence down, and make sure it fits the way you want it. And there you go, that's the width. And there's a number of ways you can, what we call, resaw these down so they're thinner. The first way, when you're working with relatively narrow stock, is to just run it through your table saw. So you bring the blade height all the way up, and as long as the blade height's above the midpoint of the board, you feed it through this way, you flip it over, you feed it through again, and you have your cut. It's going to be rough, it's going to need to be sanded. Very often there's burn marks, but that's one of the ways of doing it. If the board is too thick, you can run it through that way and then take a handsaw and saw it down that way as well. The other way to do it is with a bandsaw. Right now my bandsaw has my narrow cut blade on it, and the resaw blades are thick, so they're stiffer, and I just don't feel like changing the blade twice to cut a couple little pieces of wood. So another way of doing it is with this machine here, and this is what's called a planer, and basically what it is this assembly here has 3 blades that rotate over this table, and the blade height can be adjusted. So you feed the wood through here, the blade height comes down, and it basically planes off the wood to the height you want it. There's a measurement here that tells you how high you are, and you always want to start off, you know, above your wood and work down to it and take narrow cuts. Cut one side, flip it over, cut the other, cut one side, flip it over, cut the other, and it usually comes out really well. Half inch. Let's go see how they work. Oh, by the way, that's where planer chips come from. And here's our top, and there's the pieces we planed down, and that seam along the top is the critical one, and it's a dead nuts match. So I'm real happy with the job the thickness planer did. Okay, let's move on to, I guess the next step is to start cutting grooves in our sides and back in anticipation of putting the drawers together. Before we start grooving, I decided to, grooving, that's pretty funny. Before we start making grooves in the wood, I decided to cut these pieces to length. So the way I'm going to do it, because I'm going to duplicate this drawer, is you see this seam right here. We'll put our new piece right up, butt it right up against that. Get it nice and straight. And then we'll hold it and come back here and scribe a line underneath it where it intersects, and that's our cut. Let me do it to both pieces and we'll get going. Let me show you how I'm going to make the measurements for the back. Now at this point in the game, you have got to mark these drawer sides, or I promise you, you will groove them on the wrong side or upside down or do something stupid. So I'm just kind of setting this on this piece of plywood that's eventually going to be the bottom, and I just mark this side as R for right and the other side is L for left, and this is LI, left inside, B for back, F for front. Now we don't have to do any cuts up here to the sides, we're just going to glue that together, but we do have to make a notch back here for this piece to slide into, and we want that notch to be 1/2 the thickness of this, and then 1/2 inch in. So it'll be a 1/4 inch in this direction and a 1/2 inch in this direction, 1/4 inch in this direction, 1/2 inch in this direction, and then we will slide this in, and it's not going to butt up like that, it's actually going to be inside. So we need to know the length that we need to cut this, and the way that I'm going to do it is to measure the distance from here to here, which is 7 3/8. So that's going to be the space between the insides of the drawers, sides at the top. And we want that to be identical at the back. So if we extend these lines, we know that we have to have 7 3/8 from here to here. That's the distance that it would be, the length that this would be if it was going to fit inside these side pieces. There's nothing wrong with that, but we're going to do it a little bit differently. Remember, we're going to cut 1/4 of an inch off this and off this so that we can rabbet it in. So we've got 7 3/8 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, which is a half. So to add fractions, it's 7 3/8 plus 4/8, which is a half, gives you 7 7/8 inch length for this back piece. So we need to cut this to 7 7/8, and then we will notch these, and then this should slide in there, and your drawer should be square. All right, the back piece is cut. Now the last thing we have to do as far as the fitment here is to cut this dado out so the back piece fits in there. And remember, we want it to be 1/2 the thickness of this board, which we know is a 1/2 inch, so that's 1/4 inch. And we want it to be the thickness of this board, which is a 1/2 inch. So we need to cut out a little corner that's 1/4 inch high and a 1/2 inch long. And so I penciled that out. I put an X there to show what material is going to be removed. And now we're going to go to the table saw and do that. One of the things that can always get you is when you forget what side your saw kerf is on. When you cut, the blade is 1/8 of an inch wide, at least this blade is. And if you cut on the wrong side of your line, your cut's going to be off by 1/8 of an inch. Now let's take a look here. We're looking for a 1/2 inch cut, and you see we've got that set for a 1/2 inch, and there's a 1/2 inch there, and there's a 1/2 inch there. But when we feed this piece through, we're going to get that 1/2 inch plus 1/8 inch. So we have to make sure that we understand that the way this saw is set up, this side here is the work side and this side here is the waste side, but we want to keep this. We want that to be a 1/2 inch. What we're going to have to do is move the fence 1/8 of an inch this way, so we make sure that this side of the blade is on our cut line. Hope that makes sense. Okay, I've moved the blade over 1/8 of an inch. You can see it's 1/8 of an inch shy of a 1/2 inch. And now when we measure to the outside of the blade, we're at a 1/2 inch. And that's going to allow us to groove a 1/2 inch on this side. I've already set the top of the blade to 1/4 inch. So we will run this through multiple times and let's see how we do. Now because we're only making a 1/4 inch cut, I'm not worried about kickback, so I'm going to keep the fence right there and let's see where the line is. And now that we have our critical cut, I'll make the second one on the other piece, and then I can move the fence out of the way. And what I'll do is I'll use the crosscut sled and I'll just back it up as I make my cuts until we have our groove. Now there's other ways of doing it. I have what's called the tenon jig, which is a heavy, almost like a vise structure that would allow you to put this up like this and make one single cut to take the back of that off. But I just don't feel like pulling it down and setting it up. So we'll be able to do this the quick and easy way by doing multiple passes. So let me get at this. And there we are. That's our joint. Both sides, front. Let's move on to grooving it. Let's move on to cutting a groove in them. We're back at the table saw for the final milling operation. I have the blade height set at 1/4 inch. I've got our front piece in my hand. I'm going to hook that on the blade and pull it this way. Adjust the fence up against it. Lock it down. And now we have this set up to run the pieces through to cut the bottom of the groove. And then all we have to do is back it up in this direction and make repeat cuts until we have the 1/4 inch that we need. Make sure you pay attention to what you mark so you know exactly where you're putting that groove. The last thing you need is when you go to put this drawer together and one of the grooves is up here. Believe me, it happens, or even worse, out there. All right, let me get these grooved up, and gee willikers, let me get the grooves cut in these, and we'll be right back. And after you've cut your first groove, you can put the piece up against it and see that they match. So all we got to do is cut out the rest of this 1/4 inch groove on these pieces and we'll be done. Now, because the fence setup is critical, I'm going to run all 3 pieces through for the bottom groove, and then we'll start widening the dado until we get it where we want. I've got our drawer temporarily held together with some blue tape, and you can see how nicely our grooves line up for the bottom. Now, here's a design decision that you have to make at this point. You're looking at the back piece of the drawer. Classically, the back piece is cut off right at where the top of this groove is, and this then sits directly on top of the bottom, and it's fastened from underneath with one nail like a little brad. Often it will extend out the back a little bit. The existing drawer is built that way, and I'll show it to you in a minute. And obviously, if you want to leave it this way and assemble it so that when you put this back piece on, it captures this, you can. But the classical design is with this cut and sitting on top of the top. It's entirely up to you what you want to do. But let me show you how the other piece is put together. And here's the back of the other piece. And this is the bottom, obviously, and you can see how the back sits on top of the bottom. And the side then becomes an open runner instead of a square box in the back. I will choose to do it as this box is constructed, and that's how I've always done it in the past. But you can certainly leave it the way we had it, and all will be well as well. All right, let me get this last cut made in the bottom, and then we will prepare to measure for our plywood bottom. All right, last measurement that we have to do here is to determine how wide we want to make the bottom piece. Now, we built the box so it's square, and hopefully it came out square. So if we measure the inside dimension, which is from here to here, but it's also from here to here on the top, and I hope you can see what I'm doing, but it's 7 3/4. When you come out here, it's 7 3/4, and when you come down here, it's 7 3/4 as well. So we want to cut our box bottom 7 3/4. We have to accommodate 2 1/4 inch dados, so that's a half. So 7 3/4 and a half is 8 1/4 minus an eighth. So maybe 8 1/8. So that's how you figure out how you're going to do that. As far as the length goes, because of the way we are, got my big fat hand right in front of the screen, because of the way we decided to construct the drawer, this back piece is just going to lay on top, so we can let this come out long and even put the back piece on it and then run it through the table saw and cut it flush that way. So we've only got to really worry about the width measurements. And as far as material, I'm just going to use this 1/4 inch piece of plywood. It's sold as underlayment. I bought it at Home Depot by the sheet. It's about $13 for a 4x8 sheet. It's pretty inexpensive. It works great for drawer bottoms, and it works great for the backs of cabinets. If you're doing an old cabinet that the back is blown out of it, this stuff works great. I find it to be actually better than 1/4 inch plywood. All right, let me get cracking on this, and I'll bring you back. And just in case I said something stupid, here's the calculations for that drawer bottom. 7 3/4, which is the inside diameter, plus 2 1/4, or 1/2, which is the dado, equals 8 1/4. We then subtracted 1/8 from the width to give us a 1/16 of an inch play at each edge, which leads us to 8 1/8. And I set the fence at 8 1/8 and just ripped it through. Here's what's left of it. And there's the bottom in the drawer. And there's our back piece setting on top like it needs to. Let's get this thing glued up. I have to apologize, the battery went dead during the glue up, but we got it glued up, and I did a little bit of light sanding on it, and I'm happy the way it came out. Just pretty much what we expected. Now, if you compare this drawer, which is exactly the same size as the one that we keyed it off of, you can see the new pine is bright white and the old stuff is a lot darker. It's very, very difficult to color match oxidation. This is oxidized by age. There's no color on that. And if you just try to put some stain on this, you know how blotchy this pine is going to be. And it's common. It's quick growing pine. It's got real wide growth rings. It's going to soak the stain. It's going to look terrible. You'd have to seal this and be very judicious with your color application. And it's probably still not going to match. But you can see if I use this piece of the wood that we had cut this from and hold it up against there, you can see what a difference in color it is. Now, there's a technique that I have not shown you, and I'm going to today. I can't take credit for it. I learned it from YouTube channel Stuart McDonald. StuMac is a company that makes luthier's equipment. That's equipment for people that fix guitars and violins and things like that. And in one of their videos, they had a young lady who's quite an accomplished luthier show us how to age wood using a chemical. And the chemical that she used is an oxidizer called potassium permanganate. And you can buy this right on Amazon. That's where I bought this from. It wasn't very expensive. When you mix it in water, it turns a brilliant violet and almost a purple. When you apply it to wood, it oxidizes it. Now, I put this piece in a little while ago. Actually, it's a piece I started with, but you can see what we've got versus what we had. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little potassium permanganate on this piece and darken the color of the new wood a little bit and see how it looks. I mean, as it is now, the way the drawer is designed, it's going to be jarring when somebody opens that drawer. And we want to darken that up a little bit. So let's get set up and give it a whirl. And I'm just going to put this potassium solution on right here with a brush so I have a little bit of control. And you can see it goes on purple, but it very quickly turns kind of a golden color. And we'll just let that set and we'll see how it goes on. Let's see what happens on the side. The main presenter on the Stuart McDonald channel, although they have a number of presenters, is a guy named Dan Earlywine, and he is a genius, incredible woodworker, incredible finisher. He's a luthier of really master level, and a lot of the luthier skills translate right over to what we do here, and it's just remarkable what he can do, and what you can learn from watching Dan. And I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of the lady that presented this this particular lesson on oxidizing wood using potassium permanganate, but I'm very appreciative of that, because this is always a problem when you have new wood trying to match it to old. This is what it looks like so far. Pretty happy with it. Let me get this done and I'll bring you back. Well, what do you think of that? I got this laying out here in the Georgia sun drying, and I think that just looks beautiful. There's not a lick of finish on that. That's all raw wood, and it's been aged, and it looks old. Really cool. Potassium permanganate. Outstanding tip. We'll be using this more often. Well, listen, that was a great little project. Something a little new for the channel, and I sure enjoyed doing it. Every once in a while, it's nice to put down the spray gun and the stain and the stripper and all that stuff, and just work with a piece of wood. So what we did today is we used an existing drawer, used it as a template to make another drawer. We didn't do any fancy, complicated joinery, because we really couldn't. The drawer face told us what we could do. So listen, oh, and using some information that I got from the Stuart McDonald channel, we used potassium permanganate for the first time on the channel to artificially oxidize wood and make it look older, and you saw how it come out. It come out great. So we'll be using that technique more. Well, listen, from our shop just outside Kennesaw here in North Georgia, best regards, thanks for watching, take good care, we'll see you next video. And remember, it's just wood. Well, hell, today it was just wood. Take good care. We'll see you next video. Bye.